My guest at this time is Andrew Arthur. He's resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington. We've asked him to weigh in on the Trump administration's decision to keep migrant families together at the border, but also detain them all there until their cases are adjudicated. And Art, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, this announcement was made on Wednesday. Department of Homeland Security Acting Secretary Kevin McAleenan essentially laying out the policy in pretty clear English, saying that the care of the children is one of the top priorities. But let's start with whether this change can actually be made. I've read in USA Today, for example, that the family separation policy was based on a 1997 class action settlement that concluded children cannot be detained more than 20 days. This is obviously going to get challenged, so how strong is Trump's legal ground here?
The president's legal ground is extremely strong, and let me just give you a little bit of background about that. The case was called Flores versus Reno, after my then-boss, Janet Reno, back in 1997. So this is 22 years old. The case originally involved the conditions of detention of alien minors in immigration custody. And for years, was tweaked here and there around the edges. In 2014, we saw a huge influx of unaccompanied alien children, or UACs, along the border, as well as a pretty fair number of parents coming with children at the same time. There are various reasons for that, but in any event, we did see a huge influx, tens of thousands. And the Obama administration, under his then Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, confronted with this, opened a series of temporary shelters in order to house these individuals, both children and parents with children, along the border. The plaintiffs in the Flores case went back to the judge in that case, an Obama-appointed judge named Dolly G. out of the Central District of California in Los Angeles, and challenged this detention. And Judge G did something very interesting. One, she found that Flores, which by that point had been around for 18 years, applied not only to unaccompanied alien children, but to accompanied alien children. So, not just minors who showed up without parents, but minors who showed up with parents. And then, exceptionally, she came up with a rule that minors could only be detained by immigration for 20 days. There are really no good reasons why 20 days was picked. I guess she thought it was a nice round number. But so that decision was affirmed by the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in 2016. For that reason, any parent who shows up with a child is going to be released within 20 days unless we separate parents and children. Well, we know that Attorney General Jeff Sessions had a zero-tolerance policy with respect to immigration prosecutions back in 2018, and that the president had to quickly backtrack on that, issued an executive order that said that we would not separate families. So for that reason, if families showed up, if parents showed up, or guardians showed up with a child, they too would take advantage of that 20-day release. Not surprisingly, we've seen the numbers of family units, as we refer to them, spike over the last few months. So, in fact, in May of 2019, 84,491 aliens who are traveling in family units were apprehended by Border Patrol entering the United States illegally. And the problem is we only have 2,500 detention beds for them, and we can only hold them for 20 days, so there's no real reason for the president to ask Congress for more detention beds because we can't hold these individuals anyway. The Flores regulation, or the Flores settlement agreement, as interpreted, was supposed to terminate within 5 years, and then later on it'll terminate as soon as regulations are issued by the Department of Justice, then Department of Justice, implementing the decision. Well, it's now the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security, and that's what the president has done. The president has done what President Bush said he would do, President Obama said he would do, and that is to actually issue the regulations implementing Flores. And now Flores will, if those regulations are allowed to take effect, end. But, of course, the regulation itself has to go back to Judge Gee, the same one who smacked down the Obama administration previously and came up with this arbitrary rule. So the odds are she's probably not going to approve it, no matter how good it is. The question becomes whether the Ninth Circuit does. And there are a couple things to keep in mind here, and you really need to sort of screen out the popular press, which doesn't really, have a very tight grasp on these issues anyway. And that is that, this was a very carefully thought out regulation. It was notice of proposed rulemaking was issued back in September. More than 100,000 comments were received, and the White House, DHS, and HHS sifted through those 100,000 comments in issuing the final order. So they've complied with the Administrative Procedures Act, which is one ground on which you see a lot of decisions from the Trump administration get struck down. So the president's on pretty strong footing in this particular instance. Again, the 20-day rule isn't written in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's not, something that Congress said or even a president said. This is something that one district court judge said that 3 other circuit court judges agreed with. So I think the president at the end of the day, and that the end of the day may not be that far off in the future, is probably going to prevail on this one.
So we're talking with Art Arthur, resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington. So on the one hand, Art, this eliminates parent-child separation, which everyone wants. On the other, you have Democrats now, like Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, asserting this is tantamount to internment camps because these cases can take years to be resolved. What are the facts on that? How long do these cases take when the migrants are actually present for the hearings?
Well, that's a canard, and with all due respect to him, I trust that he's been misinformed or really doesn't understand the issue. But again, when has that ever stopped a politician? The real truth is, and I speak on this as an authority, I agree with what Secretary McAleenan said yesterday. Back when we ran family processing centers, and I had jurisdiction over one, the only one at the time in Berks, Pennsylvania, these cases took generally about 50 days, and most of the asylum claims that these individuals made were found not to be valid. Not that they didn't necessarily have a fear, not that they, that nothing bad had ever happened to them or they weren't fleeing poverty, but it didn't satisfy the standard for asylum in the United States or for protection under the Convention Against Torture. So we're talking really about 50 days. Again, you have a right to an appeal. Those appeals can be expedited. And, generally take another couple months for that. So at most 110, 120 days is what we're really talking about. Indefinite detention in this situation is just a scare phrase that people use to, bring up images of Abu Ghraib and any other of, other regrettable situations. And again, these are individuals who have come to the United States illegally. It's important to keep that in mind. It's important to keep in mind the claims that they make. As you read them, the papers are always, they're fleeing violence, they're fleeing poverty, and they're fleeing corruption. Well, these are, well-run, well-staffed facilities. The individuals who are detained in these facilities, again, I have knowledge of this because I had jurisdiction over one, are highly trained professionals. They have 24-hour medical availability. There will be 24-hour translation services available to them. If you get up in the middle of the night and you're feeling a little hungry, there's food available to you. There are drinks. When I was up at Berks last year, there was fresh fruit sitting out on the counter. There are soccer fields, there are basketball courts, and there was a fence out back, but it was a split rail fence like I used to have around my house down the street. And there's actually a big gap in that fence. So if you want to walk out into, Berks County, Pennsylvania, you're perfectly free to. I can't imagine why you would want to do that because you literally have all of your needs satisfied. But if the question is between 3 options, 1, remaining in your home country where things are purportedly horrible if you read the press, 2, being detained in one of these, safe facilities, or 3, just being dumped in the United States, number 2 sounds like the best one. So, it allows these individuals to be cared for, to receive medical care, to receive education, to receive recreation, to receive nutrition. And again, some of these people have never seen a dentist, never seen a formal doctor before, so this could be the first time that they have the opportunity to, have vaccinations, for example. The biggest thing that this is going to do is it's going to remove the incentive for parents to use their children as pawns and for smugglers to use children as pawns in order to get individuals seeking economic advancement into the United States where they can work illegally.
What do the critics of the president want the policy to be? Because as far as I can tell, since no one wants child separation, you've got basically three options, and you mentioned them. You can go back to family separation. You can send them back to their original country with no hearings, or you can just let everyone in. So what do they want the policy to be?
Most of the critics of the president want the policy to be whatever the president doesn't want. But in this particular instance, I mean, they appear to want, individuals to simply be given a sheet of paper and released into the United States. But here's the reason why that's not in the best interest either of the migrants or of especially of the children. There was a bipartisan panel that was convened by the Homeland Security Advisory Council. It was the CBP Families and Children panel, and they issued a final interim emergency report, if such a thing is possible, back in April. And they talked about the hardship that these children face. I mean, they are subjected to every sort of, hell that you can imagine. And that hell terminates when either they have to, go over a fence, go under razor wire, go through rivers to come to the United States. The smugglers never tell you, when they're trying to convince you to come to the United States about any of these things. And here's the worst part. About two-thirds of all individuals that undertake this journey to the United States are subject to physical violence of one sort or another. About one-third of the women are sexually assaulted. And again, this was a bipartisan report, talked about how, the smugglers are actually, using the children during the smuggling journey to demand sex from the mothers of these children, knowing that the mothers will do whatever they have to do in order to protect their kids. So the current system is actually horrible. With all due respect to the senator, to the other 99 senators and 435 members of Congress, this is a bad situation that we have right now. It's a horrible situation, and it needs to end. It's a humanitarian disaster. So the president, Secretary McAleenan, Secretary Azar, have, crafted a humanitarian solution. And, in my opinion, and it's my opinion, this is the most humanitarian decision that could be made. The numbers of people who attempt to undertake this journey are going to fall if they know that they can't simply be released into the United States. In fact, they'll go back to the historical numbers that we used to see of a few hundred of these family units showing up at the border every month. So that's what we need to get to.
Art, fascinating as always. Thank you so much for your historical first-person perspectives on the history of the policy that's being dealt with here, and for giving your insights on where you think it's headed. Thanks very much for being with us today, as always.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Andrew Arthur, resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.